Diana. Good evening and welcome to this special presentation. For the next 35 minutes, we'll explore the complicated relationship between entertainment and politics, where they align, where they clash, and how they shape our national conversation. Mr. Grant, Congresswoman Carter, thank you both for being here. Robert, smooth, practiced charm. The pleasure is mine, Diana. And may I say, Congresswoman, it's an honor to finally meet you. I've admired your passion from afar. Jasmine, professional, measured. Thank you, Mr. Grant. Your humanitarian work has certainly made an impact across several continents. Diana, before we begin, let me explain the format. We'll cover 4 main topics, with each of you having 2 minutes for initial responses, followed by a 3-minute discussion period. I'll moderate when necessary, but our goal is authentic dialogue. Our first topic, the responsibility of public figures, whether from entertainment or politics, to shape cultural values. Congresswoman Carter, we'll begin with you. Jasmine, direct, articulate. Thank you, Diana. The question of responsibility is central to public service. When voters send me to Congress, I take an oath to represent their interests faithfully, to study the issues deeply, to understand the implications of policy, and to make decisions that benefit not just my constituents but the entire nation. That's the democratic contract. The difference between political figures and entertainment figures is fundamentally one of accountability. If I fail to deliver on my promises, or if I misrepresent facts, I face consequences at the ballot box. There's a systemic check on my power. Entertainment figures, while tremendously influential, operate under different rules. Their platforms are often built on popularity rather than expertise. When an actor with millions of followers speaks about complex policy issues without deep understanding, misinformation can spread rapidly. This isn't about intention, it's about impact. I believe that anyone with a significant platform has a responsibility to recognize the limits of their knowledge, to elevate expert voices rather than overshadow them, and to understand that influence without accountability can be dangerous in a democracy. Diana. Thank you, Congresswoman. Mr. Grant, your response? Robert. Thoughtful, measured. I appreciate the Congresswoman's perspective, but I think she misunderstands the nature of cultural influence. Politicians often speak as though they have a monopoly on serious discourse, but the truth is that art and entertainment have always been vehicles for social change. When I made The Crossing in 2007, showing the real experiences of refugees, millions of viewers developed empathy for a crisis they'd previously ignored. That film raised over $50 million for humanitarian aid and influenced policy discussions across Europe. Was that not responsible use of my platform? Entertainment figures don't need to be policy experts to make valuable contributions to public discourse. Our role is often to humanize issues that have become abstract in political debate, to tell stories that connect on an emotional level that policy papers never will. As for accountability, believe me, the public and press scrutinize every word. Celebrities say, one misstep can end a career overnight. The difference is that our accountability comes through cultural channels rather than elections, but it's no less real. Diana. Let's open this up for discussion. Congresswoman, how do you respond? Jasmine. I don't dispute the cultural impact of art, Mr. Grant. The Crossing was indeed powerful. But there's a difference between thoughtful artistic expression and celebrities offering uninformed opinions on complex policy matters simply because they have a microphone. Robert. Leaning forward. But who decides what qualifies as informed enough? Many politicians speak confidently on science, economics, international relations, areas where they have no formal expertise. At least artists acknowledge we're approaching issues from a human perspective. Jasmine. The difference is that elected officials have entire teams of policy experts informing their positions, access to classified information, and direct experience implementing solutions. When a celebrity speaks, they're typically offering personal opinions without that infrastructure. Robert. Slightly defensive. That's quite presumptuous. Many of us work closely with NGOs, scientists, and experts in the fields we advocate. For I spent 6 months with doctors at refugee camps before producing The Crossing. That's hardly uninformed opinion. Jasmine, and I commend that preparation. But for every thoughtful actor like yourself, there are dozens who spread dangerous misinformation on crucial issues like vaccines or climate science because their fame gives them unearned credibility. Diana, let me jump in here. Mr. Grant, do you acknowledge there's a responsibility that comes with your platform? Robert, absolutely. But responsibility doesn't mean silence. It means doing the homework, consulting experts, and using your voice thoughtfully. And frankly, I think politicians could learn something about authentic communication from artists. Diana, let's move to our second topic, money and politics, particularly the relationship between Hollywood wealth and political campaigns. Mr. Grant, we'll start with you this time. Robert, confident. Campaign finance is certainly a complex issue in our democracy. Hollywood has traditionally supported political candidates, yes, but this reflects genuine alignment on values rather than some attempt to purchase influence. When I've supported candidates financially, it's been based on their positions on humanitarian issues, climate action, and social justice, causes I've championed throughout my career. These donations represent my constitutional right to participate in democracy, just as any citizen can. What's often overlooked in this conversation is that entertainment industry donations are transparent and typically come from individuals acting on personal conviction, unlike the dark money flooding our system from corporate interests. If we're concerned about money corrupting politics, and we should be, I'd suggest looking at industries seeking specific regulatory favors rather than artists supporting causes they believe in. The entertainment industry has been a crucial supporter of campaign finance reform precisely because we want a system where ideas matter more than dollars. I've personally campaigned for public financing of elections because democracy shouldn't be a luxury good. Diana, thank you. Congresswoman Carter. Jasmine, analytical, precise. I appreciate Mr. Grant's personal commitment to campaign finance reform, but we need to separate individual intentions from systemic effects. Hollywood money in politics is not exceptionally virtuous simply because it comes from artists. The entertainment industry is a $720 billion business with concrete policy interests, from intellectual property laws to production tax credits worth billions. When studio executives and celebrities host fundraisers where access costs $10,000 a plate, that creates the same democratic distortions as any other industry buying access. What's particularly troubling is the way entertainment money can launder corporate influence through celebrity. When an actor beloved for playing heroic characters endorses a candidate, voters transfer that fictional integrity to the politician. It's emotional manipulation disguised as civic engagement. My campaign refuses donations over $100 from any individual, regardless of industry. I believe representatives should reflect their entire constituency, not just those wealthy enough to attend exclusive fundraisers in Hollywood Hills mansions or corporate boardrooms. Diana, let's discuss. Mr. Grant, does Hollywood money come with expectations? Robert, slightly indignant. That's a rather cynical framing, Diana. When I support a candidate, I'm expressing my values as a citizen, not issuing demands as an investor. And I resent the implication that voters are somehow manipulated by celebrity endorsements. People are smarter than that. Jasmine, if there are truly no expectations, why do campaigns track donor data so carefully? Why do candidates spend so much time at industry fundraisers instead of with everyday constituents? Access follows money. That's not cynicism. It's documented reality. Robert, defensive. Perhaps because candidates find value in connecting with people who are deeply engaged in cultural issues, and let's be clear, the hundreds of thousands I might help raise for a campaign pales in comparison to what fossil fuel companies or pharmaceutical giants spend. Jasmine, that comparison actually proves my point. All concentrated wealth in politics distorts representation, whether it comes with good intentions or not. And Hollywood's progressive image often masks quite conventional economic interests. Robert, composed but clearly annoyed. I find it interesting that politicians happily cash checks from entertainment figures while simultaneously criticizing the source. If the money is so corrupting, perhaps return it. Diana. We're getting into interesting territory here. Congresswoman, final thought on this segment. Jasmine. I'd simply say that systemic problems require systemic solutions. Individual virtue doesn't fix structural corruption. That's why I support public financing of elections, to free politicians from dependence on any wealthy donors, Hollywood included. Diana. Our third topic addresses representation in both industries. How do Hollywood and Washington each handle diversity and inclusion? Congresswoman Carter, please begin. Jasmine, passionate but controlled. Representation isn't just about optics, it's about outcomes. When decision-makers share limited perspectives, the resulting policies or content inevitably contain blind spots. Congress has made progress. My freshman class included historic numbers of women and people of color. But structurally, our institutions still reflect centuries of exclusion. The average member of Congress is significantly wealthier, whiter, and older than the average American. That shapes which issues receive attention and which communities get served. What's particularly relevant to tonight's conversation is how entertainment either reinforces or challenges these disparities. For decades, Hollywood narratives normalized certain power structures while marginalizing entire communities. The stories we tell shape what voters believe is possible or desirable in leadership. My concern is that Hollywood often congratulates itself for surface-level diversity while maintaining the same power structures behind the camera. A female superhero, written, directed, and produced entirely by men, isn't meaningful progress. And when studios cynically leverage social justice language for marketing while fighting worker protections and fair pay, that's particularly damaging. Both our industries need to address representation as a matter of justice, not just optics. Diana. Thank you, Mr. Grant. Robert. Thoughtful, measured. I agree with much of what the Congresswoman said. Entertainment has historically fallen short on representation, both on screen and behind the camera. Those failures have consequences beyond our industry. However, I would argue that Hollywood has shown more capacity for evolution than Washington. In the past decade alone, we've seen transformative changes in who gets to tell stories and whose stories get told. Films and shows featuring diverse casts and creators aren't just winning awards, they're dominating the box office and streaming numbers. I've personally committed to the Inclusion Writer Initiative, ensuring diverse hiring on my projects. My production company maintains a strict policy of equal pay and has funded emerging filmmakers from underrepresented communities. These aren't just ethical choices. They've resulted in better, more successful creative work. The entertainment industry certainly has more progress to make, but we're demonstrating that change is possible when there's genuine commitment. Perhaps Washington could learn from that example of institutional transformation. Diana, let's discuss. Mr. Grant, critics might say Hollywood's changes are market-driven rather than values-driven, addressing diversity only when it became profitable. Robert, acknowledging. There's some truth to that criticism. Industries respond to incentives, but motivation matters less than outcomes, doesn't it? The fact that representation is now seen as commercially necessary represents profound cultural progress. Jasmine, with challenging. But when progress depends entirely on profit motive, it remains conditional and limited. Hollywood embraces certain kinds of diversity that test well with audiences while still marginalizing others. And the decision-makers, studio heads, network executives, remain overwhelmingly homogeneous. Robert, defensive. That's changing too, though not quickly. Enough, I admit. But I'd turn the question back to Washington. How many congressional committees are chaired by women or people of color, proportionate to the population? At least in entertainment, talent has pathways to influence that don't require wealth or connections. Jasmine. Direct. That is simply not accurate. Entertainment remains one of the most nepotistic industries in America. How many actors come from acting families? How many directors are the children of directors? The idea of Hollywood as a meritocracy is a powerful myth that doesn't match reality. Robert. Slightly heated. And politics isn't dynastic? How many political families can we name that have held power for generations? At least in my industry, audiences ultimately decide success or failure. Bad performances can't be gerrymandered into hits. Diana, both your industries clearly face challenges with access and representation. Final thoughts on this segment? Jasmine. The key difference is that political representation has direct consequences for people's rights and resources. When Hollywood lacks diversity, we get poor storytelling. When Congress lacks diversity, people lose healthcare, housing, and civil liberties. Robert. I'd argue that cultural representation shapes what becomes politically possible. The West Wing changed how a generation thought about public service. Black Panther transformed perceptions of leadership. Stories matter precisely because they shape the political imagination. Diana. For our final segment, let's discuss the deterioration of public discourse. In an era of increasing polarization, what responsibility do public figures have to model constructive dialogue? Mr. Grant, please begin. Robert. Earnest, concerned. This is perhaps the most urgent challenge facing our society. We've lost the ability to disagree productively, to see political opponents as fellow citizens rather than enemies. Both entertainment and politics have contributed to this deterioration. In entertainment, conflict drives ratings. Reality shows thrive on manufactured antagonism. News programs feature theatrical debates rather than substantive discussions. We've blurred the line between information and spectacle in ways that reward the most extreme voices. Politicians, meanwhile, have embraced increasingly apocalyptic rhetoric, portraying every election as an existential battle between good and evil. Compromise is treated as betrayal, rather than the necessary foundation of democratic governance. I believe public figures have a special responsibility to model nuanced thinking. That's why I've made a personal commitment to work with artists across the political spectrum to find common ground even in disagreement. My foundation brings together conservative and progressive voices for structured dialogue on contentious issues. We need to remember that how we disagree matters as much as what we disagree about. Democracy depends on maintaining mutual respect, even in fierce conflict. Diana. Thank you. Congresswoman Carter. Jasmine. Measured but intense. I agree that polarization threatens our democracy, but I'm concerned about false equivalence in discussions of political discourse. Not all inflammatory rhetoric is created equal. When political figures deliberately spread misinformation about election results, when they use dehumanizing language about immigrants or religious minorities, when they traffic in conspiracy theories about their opponents, and this isn't just normal political conflict. It's a fundamentally different category of discourse that cannot be normalized through calls for civility. True constructive dialogue requires a shared commitment to certain democratic foundations: respect for truth, equal dignity of all citizens, and peaceful transfer of power. Without these foundations, calls for civility often function to silence legitimate moral outrage. My approach is to maintain absolute clarity about values while remaining open to good faith disagreement about methods. I can respectfully debate tax policy with colleagues across the aisle, precisely because we share fundamental commitments to democracy itself. But I won't pretend that all political speech deserves equal respect or legitimacy. Diana. Let's discuss. Mr. Grant, does the Congresswoman's distinction make sense to you? Robert. Thoughtful. It does, though I worry about who decides which speech falls outside the boundaries of legitimate discourse. Democracy requires space for provocative, even offensive ideas to be expressed and then refuted, not suppressed. Jasmine, I'm not advocating suppression by government. I'm talking about responsible use of platforms. When media companies amplify dangerous conspiracy theories for profit, when celebrities spread medical misinformation to millions of followers, that's not healthy democratic discourse. Robert. Conciliatory. That's as fair. Private platforms have responsibilities distinct from government, but I still believe engagement is usually more effective than exclusion. Some of my most meaningful conversations have been with people whose views initially seemed beyond the pale. Jasmine. Challenging. That approach comes from a position of privilege, though. For communities directly threatened by certain rhetoric, engaging with ideas that question their basic humanity isn't an academic exercise. It's traumatic and dangerous. Robert. Defensive. I don't think empathy and dialogue represent privilege. They're essential human capacities, and dismissing opposing viewpoints as beyond engagement often backfires, driving people toward more extreme positions. Jasmine. There's a difference between opposing viewpoints on tax policy and opposing viewpoints on whether certain groups deserve basic rights. Democracy requires some non-negotiable moral foundations. Robert. Increasingly frustrated. And who determines those foundations? This is the fundamental challenge. In a diverse society, we need mechanisms to navigate profound moral disagreement without resorting to force or silencing. Diana. We're touching on fundamental questions about democracy itself. As we near the end of our time, final thoughts from each of you on how we move forward? Jasmine. We move forward by being absolutely clear about what democracy requires: equal respect for all citizens, commitment to truth over convenient fiction, and willingness to accept electoral outcomes even when disappointed. Within those boundaries, vigorous disagreement is healthy and necessary. Robert. Composing himself. I believe we move forward through humanizing rather than demonizing. Entertainment at its best helps us see the world through others' eyes. Politics at its best translates that empathy into structures that serve human flourishing. Both require seeing the humanity in those we disagree with. Diana. Before we conclude, I'd like each of you to reflect on what you've learned from the other's perspective tonight. Congresswoman Carter. Jasmine. Thoughtful. I appreciate Mr. Grant's emphasis on the power of storytelling to create empathy. Policy discussions can become abstract, removed from the human realities they address. Artists remind us that behind every statistic is a human story. That's something politicians should remember more often. I also respect his personal commitment to humanitarian causes. Whatever our philosophical differences, that dedication to alleviating suffering reflects values I share. Diana. Thank you, Mr. Grant. Robert. Initially sincere. I've been struck by the Congresswoman's precision and clarity of thought. She challenges me to be more specific in my thinking, to move beyond general principles to concrete implications. I also admire her courage in taking firm positions even when they might be unpopular. There's an authenticity there that's refreshing in politics. Pause then with a sudden shift to a joking tone. Though I must say, I'm still trying to figure out if she's this intense in every conversation, or if she's putting on a special performance for the cameras tonight. After all, I'm not the only one here who knows how to play to an audience. Chuckles, clearly expecting others to join in the levity. I mean, we actors are accused of being dramatic, but politicians have mastered the art of moral outrage as performance. At least we admit when we're playing a role. Awkward silence. In the studio. Jasmine, initially stunned, then composed. I see. Pause, collecting herself. Mr. Grant, I came here tonight prepared for substantive dialogue about serious issues that affect millions of lives. I didn't prepare for personal insinuations about my integrity or authenticity. What you've just demonstrated is exactly the problem we've been discussing. The collapse of constructive discourse. When substantive disagreement becomes too challenging, it's easier to undermine your opponent's character than engage with their ideas. Looking directly at him. This isn't performance for me, Mr. Grant. When I leave this studio, I return to the work of drafting legislation that determines whether families can afford health care, whether communities have clean water, whether our planet remains habitable. These aren't abstract concerns or opportunities for applause. They're the daily substance of governance. So no, I'm not performing. And the suggestion that passionate advocacy equals insincerity only makes sense to someone who is confused, playing heroes with being one. Diana, clearly uncomfortable, trying to salvage the moment. I think we've touched on some raw nerves here, which perhaps illustrates how difficult these conversations can be. Mr. Grant, would you like to respond? Robert, realizing his mistake, flustered. I apologize, Congresswoman. That was an inappropriate attempt at humor that clearly missed the mark. You're right to call me out. Our discussion deserved better than that cheap shot. And so did you. Jasmine. Professional but not warm. I appreciate your apology, Mr. Grant. I would suggest that this moment is instructive for everyone watching. The work of democracy isn't glamorous. It isn't about scoring points or landing singers. It's about the patient, often frustrating work of engaging with different perspectives to find workable solutions. Entertainment has conditioned us to expect neat conclusions and satisfying comebacks. Reality is messier. Perhaps that's the most important bridge we need to build, between our expectations of how discourse should feel and the actual work required to solve complex problems together. Diana, relieved at the professional recovery. That's a powerful note to end on. I want to thank both Mr. Grant and Congresswoman Carter for this conversation. While not always comfortable, it has been illuminating. To our audience, remember that democracy thrives when we approach our differences with both conviction and humility. Thank you for joining us for Bridging the Divide. Good night. Outro. Music begins as cameras pull back. Robert approaches Jasmine to shake hands. She accepts professionally but briefly, then turns to speak with the production staff. Robert. Quietly, just to Jasmine. I truly am sorry. That was beneath both of us. Jasmine. Quietly, but firmly. Next time you want to understand political authenticity, Mr. Grant, spend less time at fundraising galas and more time at community meetings where people are fighting for their lives. You might find less to joke about. She walks away as the studio lights dim. A production assistant's phone has captured this final exchange, though neither Robert nor Jasmine notice.